Good evening. I'm Miriam Alavi, Dean of the Scheller College of Business at Georgia Tech. Thank you for joining us for the first session of our Dean's CEO Speaker Series for this year. For tonight's conversation, we are excited to welcome Craig Menear, Chairman and CEO of the Home. Craig has graciously accepted our invitation to discuss his leadership perspective, vision for the Home Depot, and the future of retail business. Craig Menear is Chairman and CEO of the Home Depot. He was named CEO and President in November of 2014 and Chairman in February of 2015. The Home Depot is the world's largest home improvement retailer with more than 2,200 stores and over 500,000 associates. Value and valuation and the market cap for Home Depot is $358 billion as of October 2021. Under his leadership, the company continues to focus on providing a seamless, interconnected shopping experience that blends the physical and digital worlds, leveraging the convenience of its stores, digital experiences, innovative product offerings, and reliable delivery options for pro and do-it-yourself customers. It's more than 20 years with the company. He has held roles spanning merchandising, supply chain, store operations, sourcing, marketing, and online. Prior to joining the Home Depot, he worked in a variety of roles in home center, mass, and specialty retailing. Craig earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from Michigan State University's Eli Broad College of Business. 2017, he was honored with Michigan State University's Distinguished Alumni Award for his business accomplishments and commitments to philanthropic initiatives. Craig currently serves on the board of directors of the Retail Industry Leaders Association, Atlanta Committee for Progress, 3DE by Junior Achievement of Georgia, and Camp Southern Ground. Craig, thank you for joining me for this discussion. I know the demands on your schedule and the work required to drive the success of the Home Depot are sizable. We are very grateful for the time you are sharing with us today. I will ask a number of questions, and we will then open it to the audience for their questions. To those in the audience, please submit your questions through the Q&A function of the software, and Craig will address some of the questions toward the end of the session. So, Craig, I thought we can get started by asking and answering a number of rapid-fire questions. Just to So, what was your first job?
First job, I was a lifeguard.
Okay, good. Where did you go on your last vacation?
Israel.
Wonderful.
And actually, in March of 2020, I got the second to the last flight out of Tel Aviv before the world shut down.
Oh my God, yes. How do you spend your Saturdays?
Usually work in the morning and family in the afternoon.
Excellent. What is your morning routine like?
I get up reasonably early, 5:15 or so, get ready, in the office, at least 2 cups of coffee, 3 newspapers before the day starts.
Wonderful. How do you unwind after a long day?
Sports, if I can find something I'm interested on TV, or quite honestly, I actually watch a lot of videos to learn how to do things.
Oh, wonderful.
I find that kind of relaxing.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And now that you're warmed up, professional experiences. So you have been at Home Depot for how and why you decided to join the company.
Yeah, so I worked with an individual in Southern California that had joined the Home Depot several years before. And Home Depot is going into its first major metropolitan market against our chief competitor out of North Carolina with their new big box format. And he convinced me to join the company in 1997. And I joined the company as a merchant in the Southwest Division. So yeah, that was my first entree into Home Depot.
Good decision. Good decision.
Yes.
Of your timing. You were at the Home Depot for 17 years before you became CEO. Tell us about your career journey and take us to the company all the way to the position of CEO.
Yeah, so I had done a lot of things prior to joining Home Depot. I had started on the floor of retail, working in stores. I'd done inventory plan and replenishment, sales and marketing, merchandising, as well as warehousing. And like I said, I joined the company as a merchant, and really my career in Home Depot, for the most part, has been in merchandising. But merchandising defined at the Home Depot actually was reasonably broad. So I was responsible for not only the core merchandising, but I was responsible for global sourcing. I was responsible for supply chain, for our online business, as well as marketing. And I, kind of grew up in terms of merchant to divisional merchandise manager, then became merchandising vice president for the Southwest Division. We centralized in 2001 here in Atlanta. And when we did that, I was the merchandising vice president for hardware, went on to become SVP in merchandising, then ultimately EVP of merchandising before stepping into the president and COO role.
Well, of course, you have been, it's a very broad perspective that you have developed by looking at those different positions at Home Depot, which I'm sure is now serving you really well. So the company has made significant investments in business under your leadership. Tell us about those investments and a Home Depot strategy that I believe is referred to as the One Home Depot strategy.
Sure. In a lot of discussions that we had with our board, we made a decision late 2017 that we actually needed to accelerate the investment in the business. So we doubled what we normally were investing in the business. And over a 3-year period from 18, 19 to 20, we put about $11 billion back into the business to create really what we saw as the One Home Depot experience. The customers were blending the physical and digital worlds together. And candidly, that's not how we were built. It's not how our systems worked. So we needed to move fast to stay ahead of where the customer was taking us. And the big pieces of that investment, we knew that, look, the store was really important. So a good chunk of the investment continued to go into our stores. In today's world, if somebody's going to get in their car and go to a physical store, it better be a great experience. So we invested in the stores. We made a commitment to invest in accelerated capabilities in our technology infrastructure. We really, were heavily reliant on old legacy systems. We knew we had to get to a new foundational base, move to the cloud to be able to leverage the data that we were getting. So pretty significant investment there. We worked hard to build out capabilities in our supply chain. And so we invested about $1.2 billion of the $11 billion that continues really through 22 before we're done to open up roughly 150 new distribution centers that will allow us to be able to deliver any type of goods we sell, That can be a parcel shipment, or it can be a pallet going on a flatbed truck with a moppet. We want to be able to serve 90% of the U.S. population same day, next day capable. So supply chain, big investment. And then, of course, the digital world is now the front door of our store. So massive investments in the digital world to continue to develop that experience and leverage the data. But it's all about blending the physical and digital worlds together.
Exactly. And, it used to be said that the idea about digitization was that we want to align digital with physical. But nowadays, it's the fusion of digital and physical. So it sounds fascinating. And as I listen to you and understanding and reading about Home Depot, it's really a high-tech company. Home Depot is truly a high-tech company because of all these investments and these forward-thinking ideas of this omni-channel and really focusing on an experience for the customer, that it doesn't matter which channel they go and how they flip-flop between there. So you obviously have done an amazing job in the so-called digital transformation of your organization.
Thank you.
And of course, after the pandemic, every organization is on that journey, but you have done an amazing job. So
Thank you.
Let me start talking a little bit about this idea of your growth. Of course, the past 19 months have been very challenging, and it has been very complex in different ways for different companies. Home Depot has been in a unique position. You have navigated very difficult circumstances, and yet the company has had historic growth at the same time. How did you manage to exist and navigate both worlds like that?
Yeah, you said it. We're very fortunate that through the pandemic, the customer actually was highly engaged in our space. And that's not the case for all of retail. We grew $34 billion in the last 6 quarters. And so, and put that in context, it took us 21 years to get the first 30 billion in sales. But as you said, the last 19 months have definitely been challenging. In the beginning, it was very challenging. And what we ended up doing was we actually had daily meetings with the executive leadership of the team at 4 o'clock every day for 180 days straight, because we had the need to make rapid decisions. We would seek feedback from the organization throughout the day. We'd try to understand the challenges that were happening. Then we'd get together as a leadership team and go through that, and everybody would bring their issues to the table, and we'd make decisions on what needed to be done to support our stores and our frontline associates in our call centers and those supporting the business in our distribution centers. At the same time, quite candidly, our team in Washington and with government relations was keeping us informed, because things were changing at an incredible pace. At the peak, we were dealing with over 2,000 different local regulations in different states and markets. Portions of businesses were being shut down, portions of stores were being shut down. We were trying to remain classified as an essential retailer because we knew we were heading into storm season. And when storm season hits, our customers rely on us to be there for them. So we were very, very concerned about that. But we did that. We pivoted really to put our associates and safety first. And we constrained the number of folks in our stores. We cut back the number of hours that we had open. We pulled away from all of the typical events that we would run. We're going into spring. That's our busiest time of the year. And those events would drive lots of traffic to the stores. We eliminated all those. And then we kept going. And to this day, we still have, regular sessions where we sit down. We don't do it every day anymore, but where we sit down as a leadership team and then review all the things that we've learned over the past week and the things that come up, and then make decisions going forward. So we learned that the most important thing for us the last 19 months, you got to be flexible and agile because you can't predict anything. So you've got to be in a position to be flexible enough to react to what is in front of you.
In fact, that really was going to be my next question about what has been the greatest leadership lesson for you during the pandemic. So this issue around agility and flexibility, it's really important. And I want to go back to a comment you made about trying to stay open and be responsive to your customers. You know, Home Depot, I have heard that, and I can't remember whom I have heard it from. But it's the kind of retail operation that people come to you, chase their dreams and build their home and dream home, or God forbid they come to Home Depot because there has been a disaster and now they have to rebuild and recover from disaster. Right. So being able to cover from disaster to home dream, that's a big distance. And obviously you have managed to do that, particularly under some of the most difficult and complex circumstances. Any other personal leadership issues that or lessons that you have learned? And by that I mean, you know, anyone, every single one of us. It doesn't have to be necessarily in a leadership position. At a personal level, over the last 19 months, we have felt vulnerable as people, right? So I was wondering if you care to share a moment where you individually, personally felt vulnerable, and how did you talk yourself through that moment?
Sure. I think, you know, when you're running a business, you have lots of constituents, right? So for the Home Depot, you know, you've got your associates, you've got your customers, you've got shareholders, you have communities that you serve. And in a normal environment, you're balancing those constituents all the time. And, you know, that it's something that you do, but it's not incredibly difficult. At least I hadn't found it to be that way. In the situation that we found ourselves in over the past 19 months, we had to make decisions that put some of those constituents ahead of others. And I'd say, you know, for me, that was I'd say not necessarily a totally new experience, but we were going to make some pretty significant decisions, for example, that would put our associates way ahead of our shareholders. And so, you know, personally, the thing that helped me the most, candidly, was really the gift that our founders gave us, which is the culture in the company. And our culture is represented by two things: the values that we try to make our decisions by within the company, and then the leadership construct, which says your customers and your frontline associates are at the top of an inverted pyramid, and I sit at the bottom of that pyramid, and along with my leadership team, and our job is to support them and take away roadblocks, right? I'd say for me personally, having that North Star of our culture made it much easier to make some of those very difficult decisions. And then candidly, the thing that you know, I'm grateful for, and at the same time I worried all the way through. You know, you and I were chatting before we started here, and I had the pleasure of working with Carol Tomei, who is my CFO, who now runs UPS. But Carol had been an incredible CFO and had been in the role for a very, very long time. One of the longest standing CFOs in the Fortune 30. So Richard had stepped in, August of 19. As a new CFO for Home Depot. And so he hadn't been in the seat all that long when all of this blew up. And so I worried on behalf of Richard, but you come back to that culture, and even as a new CFO, he never even wavered once in the decisions that we were making. I worried that I was putting pressure on him, but not once did he waver in that. And he was right there, step by step, making the decisions with us that we needed to make to support our associates. And, for a while, that was at the expense of our shareholders. They knew that they were going to take a hit, and we knew that going in.
Interestingly, obviously that was a great approach and a great strategy, simply because look at the performance of the company over the last 19 months. And in talking and interacting with the executives and other leaders, I think one thing that seems to be a big takeaway for most of them, many of them, is the importance of your employees and staff. At the end of the day, despite of amazing technology and analytics and volumes of data that is available, at the end of the day, it's the people that matter and can really respond and be agile and flexible. So that's very interesting. And like I said, obviously your strategy paid off, and that was reflected in the increased value for the shareholders shortly after.
To your point,
yeah.
Decades ago, and probably 30 years ago, Bernie Marcus, one of our founders, made the comment that, you have to take care of your associates. And if you do that, they'll take care of the customers. And as long as that happens, everything else takes care of itself. I'd say for the Home Depot, the last 19 months has proved that those words were as true 30 years ago when he said them as they were in the last 19 months. So you're absolutely correct. It's critically important to take care of your associates.
Well, that's remarkable. You talked about Bernie Marcus and his ideas, and I'm sure when you step into the role of CEO, you received a lot of advice. So my question is, what was the best advice that you received, aside possibly from the one you just shared, and who was it from?
Couple of things that stick out. Bernie and Arthur, their advice was, Craig, surround yourself with a whole bunch of people that are smarter than you, and you'll be okay. So that was good advice. Bernie's second piece of advice to me was, don't ever forget that you're a merchant first. And that actually was great advice. And then the third one that sticks out that I think is incredibly true came from Frank Blake, my predecessor. And Frank told me, he said, Craig, he goes, just realize at the end of the day, this job is never about you. And the day you think it is the day it's over. And he was absolutely correct. It's great advice.
That's wonderful. Those are great pieces of advice. And certainly I'll remember those and try to kind of reiterate those in my own head. So I have heard you talk about business has gained a significant number of millennial customers as they have started to buy homes. Do you have a specific strategy to reach the millennials, and do you treat them differently from other customer segments? I'm really interested in this question because I'm parent of a millennial, and boy, they are different. I think so. I'm interested in your perspective on that.
Thanks for the question. It's really interesting. All you had to do was look at the demographics in the country, and you knew that the millennial generation was going to become the largest population base in the United States. So the summer of 2015, after I stepped into this role, we had, for all the right reasons, we had been pretty near-term focused, trying to fix the business since, the downturn of 08, 09. And Frank really set us on a great path to do that. But I felt like it was time for us to pick our head up and look out further into the future, because the millennial generation was going to be a huge, huge driver for us, and we needed to better understand them. So we did a very deep dive in the summer of 2015 with the millennial generation to understand what their viewpoints were of the Home Depot and how they would think about the Home Depot in the future. And it actually scared us to death to do it because we weren't sure we wanted to hear the answer. The great news at the end of the day was they told us that, number one, despite all that you heard in the market, that the millennial generation would never be homeowners, they would never own anything, they'd never have a car, they'd never do any of that. They told us none of that was true, that we actually wanted to be homeowners, they wanted to be do-it-yourselfers. They said we're just behind. We're getting married later, we're behind in the process. They self-admitted that they didn't have the knowledge base that their parents had when it came to knowing how to do things, but then they also told us, but we're willing, we're able to take on things, we're totally willing to go on YouTube, learn how to do something, and we said, we know we have a safety net. If we can't figure it out, when we get in the middle, we can come in and talk to your associates in the store. And they told us that the store was actually very important to their overall shopping experience, as was the digital world was going to be important as well. So, hearing all of that, we really knew that we had to accelerate the investment in the digital world, but that we also knew that as we were growing, we had to maintain the knowledge base and the importance of the store. So we did a number of things. We changed a number of approaches to our training for our associates to make it more mobile enabled on the floor because our customers were coming in and the millennials were researching things before they came in. So they had a higher knowledge base about product when they stepped into the store. So we had to make sure that our new associates could be able to react and be able to serve in that environment. We listened to the fact they told us that they were not as knowledgeable about projects. And, historically, we had done clinics in our stores. Well, the pandemic pretty much shut that down. So we actually transferred that whole program to the digital world and created virtual clinics. And we started something called Homeowner 101. And it was teach the millennial generation all about the systems inside of their homes and what are the fundamental things you have to do to maintain them and fix them. And then likewise outside of the home. And so we had to make pivots and adjustments. The other thing that they told us was we had 4 different groups that were with us all summer long, by the way. They spent time in the stores, and then they did this project of designing the Home Depot for the future and telling us what we needed to know. One of the things that they told us was we had no idea who you were and what your culture was all about. When we think about retail, we think stores, because that's kind of how everybody thinks about it. We had no idea that it takes every discipline possible to be able to run a retailer the size that you are, from lawyers to engineers to data scientists to marketers, you name it, merchants, operators, supply chain experts. They just really hadn't thought about all of that. And then they also told us that we had no idea of the culture inside of the company. And their advice to us was to do what they called externalize the internal. Because we never really talked about Home Depot and who we are. We always worried about that not coming across as genuine and authentic. But they really pushed us to do that. And we've done more and more of that, particularly in recruiting. So we've changed a number of things, but I'm happy to tell you that the millennial generation is highly engaged in home improvement. We see them taking on projects. We see them gaining confidence and moving to more complicated projects. They've been a huge driver to home ownership growth over the last 3 years. So we are super excited about the millennial generation and the opportunity they present for the Home Depot going forward.
That sounds fascinating in terms of the deep dive, in terms of that potential customer base, really learning about them. And two things. One, I want to make sure that my daughter goes to one of those online clinics. Homeowner 101 sounds really interesting. In fact, maybe I should take one of those courses myself. But my other question is, do you have a project like that looking into the future generation and trying to understand the dynamics of the younger generation?
Yeah, I mean, clearly when you look at the younger generation, right, they are more adept at technology, right? Again, the front door of the store is right here in their pocket, and so we've had to adjust. We've really taken a mobile first approach, and we're really focused on how do we get the customer engaged from a mobile standpoint with the Home Depot. What's fascinating is over 50% of our app usership actually happens inside of one of our stores, which is really fascinating. So yeah, there's definite adjustments we've had to make as the millennial generation has begun to engage in home ownership and in DIY and home improvement, for sure.
Now, let's look into the future. And what do you think about the future of retail? Again, we talked a little bit about fusion of digital and physical. What are you most excited about?
I'd say a few things. First of all, we have a very strong belief that over time, retail continues to somewhat consolidate, and that the winners in retail will be those that blend the physical and digital worlds together. And it's interesting because even folks who started out as pure play, you begin to see most of them now engaging in some type of physical retail as well. And I'd say the second part of that I think is pretty exciting is how technology is changing the game in terms of the shopping experience and the efficiency. And so technology, in the past, very different. It was kind of like a needed necessity to operate your business. Technology is transforming the business, and it's really transforming how the customers engage. But I'd say, those two things are pretty exciting. But what I'd also tell you, the thing that is most exciting for me, and maybe it's because of my merchant background, in retail, as retailers, we're in the business of selling product. Right. And what I'd tell you is the innovation pipeline that exists, and much of that is enhanced through technology, is spectacular as you look out into the future. And I just think, I'm super excited, at least in our space, about how product will make it easier, simpler, more efficient, and better for the environment as you go forward. So super excited about all those things.
That's interesting, talking about innovation and how technology is driving innovation. So how does a huge company like Home Depot remains innovative and agile and flexible?
So, it's a great question, because the natural tendency is to stick with what you know, particularly when you've been successful. And, large organizations can get stuck in ruts. We try to push ourselves as an organization all the time to really challenge ourselves in terms of how do we reinvent things that we're doing to drive value for the customer. And, part of the exercise that we did in 2015, which we'll probably do another one of these in the next year or so, was we split up our teams and said, if you were, a private equity company, if you were one of our competitors, if you were a pure digital player, how would you attack us? And so we gave the teams, 2 months to go build a plan to attack the Home Depot. And then we actually flipped those teams and made them come up with the defenses. And it was through those defense discussions that we found lots of opportunities for us to change the business and grow. And so that's part of the challenge of what we have to do as a large organization to keep ourselves from being complacent.
Fascinating approach, and I'm going to ask only one more question. So, audience, please start inputting your questions into the chat function, the Q&A function of the software, so that we will ask Craig to respond to some of those questions. So my last question, Craig, is you probably know that we have brilliant students at Georgia Tech who have leadership aspirations. As a very successful leader, what is one or two pieces of advice that you would offer them?
So I'd say there's kind of three things to think about. You work really hard to get through school. And, when you get through school, you're kind of like, first reaction is, I can put my learning hat away. The answer to that is no. My advice to you is never stop learning. Keep challenging yourself to continue to learn because the world around you is evolving in a dramatic way. Second piece of advice that I'd have would be, again, it's not about you. It's about the people you work with, and it's about what gets accomplished. And, I'd say one of the pieces of advice that I got in the beginning of my career was from my father, who he kind of said, Craig, he goes, like, if you're going to do something, do it 110% or don't do it at all. And that has always been my focus. What I've tried to focus on is be focused on what you're doing today and try to do it to the very best you can and be the best at it. The next moves will come as you deliver performance. So don't worry about that. And I'd say my final piece of advice is I always view business like sports. And, the scorecard, quite frankly, is, the customer and the share that you take. And so you got to have a will to win. Unfortunately in life, there's winners and losers, and you'd rather be a winner than a loser. And so you got to have a will to win. And it takes a lot everybody says they have will to win, but it takes a lot to actually win. And you got to be driven to be able to do that.
Great advice, and let me now stop here and to Liz Mariansky, who is going to look at the chat and read some of the audience questions for you, Craig. Liz?
Did you want me to read them?
No, Liz is going to read them to you.
Okay, all right.
I think Liz might be having some technical difficulties. I'll jump right in here,
Okay.
if you don't mind. Let me get to the Q&A here. So here's a question from Bill Fan. First, thank you for being here today. With the supply chain blockages, especially imports from China due to the pandemic, what is your strategy in diversifying the Home Depot supply chain to ease the backlog?
Yeah, so obviously we have been doing a number of things. This is probably the most, in my 42 years in business, the most significant situation that I've seen at the ports. But we've been working on this for some time because you can kind of see it building. And the first issue was the ocean capacity. So we actually went out and leased container ship to make sure that we had the capacity to move the containers. And then as we've done in other scenarios over the years where there's slowdowns or backlogs that happen in ports, our team is pretty adept at making sure that we're utilizing all the capability of the ports around the country. So we work to try to level load, even though 40% of the U.S. goods comes through the port of LA Long Beach. We will divert and shift, whether that's to Houston or to Savannah or the Northeast or Seattle. We'll manage our flow in all of those ports to be able to try to prioritize that. We're obviously working with all the powers to be in the government as well. So we've been a strong advocate of trying to get the ports open 24/7 for quite some time. We were really pleased to see the administration's efforts to actually make that happen. I think that will begin to help solve the problem. But, longer term, we've got to modernize the ports as well. And so short term, we're doing all the things that we can do. We'll leverage all the resources inside of Home Depot to move the freight as fast as possible when we can get our hands on it. Again, the ports opening will certainly help on the West Coast. We'll divert to ports that aren't as congested wherever we can, but we're pushing hard for the kind of infrastructure things that need to happen throughout our country, not just in the ports, but in trucking, rail, all the things that are necessary to keep the supply chain moving.
Thank you for your answer on that and your insights. So Sydney Davis asks, what is a decision you've made in the past or in your current position that has stuck with you to this day? Would you make that decision again? And what would you have done differently?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I shared a little bit that during the last 19 months, we had to make some tough choices about what constituents were going to take priority. And, we made a decision that we ended up investing an incremental couple $2 billion in our associates to help them through things like paid time off, because they were dealing with all the challenges of the virus, as well as trying to serve our customers. And, I think I do believe that there are some folks that in our investment community, within even maybe in our organization, that would say, did we go too far? Did we, other people didn't do as much. Did you really have to do that much? And I'd say the answer to that was yes. And I'd do it again. And I wouldn't hesitate because I believe it was the right thing to do. And I actually believe in the fact that if we take care of our associates, they will, in fact, do a great job of taking care of our customers. And I could spend all night telling you stories that would amaze you in terms of things that our associates did to try to take care of our customers during the pandemic. So to me, I think, that's one that sticks out in my mind for sure.
Okay, you started to answer this question a little bit at the beginning, but here's the next one. How do you balance your personal and family life, the work that comes with being the chairman and CEO of a large company?
So I got bad news for you. There's no such thing as work-life balance. Now, having said that, what there is work-life integration. And what you have to do is you've got to figure out what that is for you as an individual. And what that really means is there are times when the business comes first, and then there's times when family has to come first. And, I can tell you that when Frank Blake came to me and asked me, Craig, he said, do you want to be considered as one of the folks that I would have on the list as one of my potential successors? I mean, there was no commitment there. And he was very clear that he was going to look inside and outside the company. My my comment to Frank was, can I give you my answer after I talk to my wife? Because this is going to affect her as much, if not more, than it's going to affect me. And so we sat down and talked about it. And collectively, we agreed that, yeah, we would put my name in the hat, if you will. My wife knows, for example, I'll give you a tactical element to that answer. My wife knows, don't plan anything for me the weekend before earnings. We have our earnings and board meetings in the same week, right? So once a quarter, she knows, don't plan for me to attend any social function that weekend, period. Because I'm in earnings prep. I may, if things are going well, I may be able to attend something, but don't count on it. And she knows that. And then I know that there's times where I got to make myself available to support things where she needs me. And not everything in this business is critical and has to be 24/7. And so you've got to find that right balance for yourself, what works for you and what works for your family. And I've gotten better at that over time. I wasn't so good at it earlier on in my career. Just being very honest with you.
Well, thanks for your honesty there. Here's the next question. What is some advice that you would give your younger self in relation to both networking and gaining success?
So networking, I have a strong belief, and this has actually played out well for me over time. You can shorten your learning curve by tapping the knowledge base of others. And so, we're all products of our experiences, but if you can take the time to, if you want to call it networking, if you can build relationships with people who are willing to share their experiences and what they've learned from things that they've done, that actually can be a terrific enhancement to your learning curve. And so if I could step back, I tried to do that, but I'd say to myself, well, you should have done a better job of that, because you might have been able to even shorten your learning curve on things even more so if you had dedicated a little more time to that. I'd say the second thing that probably, if I could step back and give myself advice again, it's really important to be obviously highly engaged in what you're doing in the business that you're involved in or whatever your career is. But it's also important to learn from the perspective of others outside of your environment. Because, and I didn't do this well in my earlier part of my career, but what I've learned is, creating a network of folks like my peers in other industries. I have some folks that I've been able to get to know over the years that run different businesses, completely separate from retail. They face many of the same problems we do. And their approach to solving those problems sometimes are very, very different than how we're thinking about it. And boy, that just opens your aperture to a lot of different thinking. And that is incredibly beneficial. So that'd be the two pieces of advice.
So I don't know if Pat is able to ask another question, but I certainly have another question to ask of you. And that question is, we are all dealing with a tremendous, very large information. All the channels of information. How do you manage that information? What are your go-to sources of information? There's so much going on around us.
Yeah, there are internal flows of information about the business that I have very specific things that I think are really important to keep my eye on, to make sure that I have a pulse of what's happening in the business. So there are things that I look at every single week inside the business. Obviously daily. You asked what my morning routine was. Quite honestly, the very first thing that I do is check sales from the day before. I mean, that is the absolute first thing that I do every single morning. What did the customers tell us yesterday as it relates to their experience with Home Depot? On the other elements, I shared that I try to really capture information from 3 different newspapers first thing in the morning. And so I'm trying to absorb information from different points of view. There's some stuff, and my wife teases me about this because she says sometimes that it's things that she tells me that I, quite candidly, I'll hear it, I'll listen to it, I don't even attempt to retain it. I just let it go. And maybe there's some things that I should retain that I don't, but I actually do. I joke around the fact that there's only so much space up here, so you have to be very selective about what you're retaining and what you don't retain. And that may sound funny, it may sound odd, but to your point, there's so much information out there. And honestly, you need to filter down to what's really important to remember, because otherwise you drive yourself crazy. You just can't absorb it all.
And it is the absolute truth that we all have limited short-term memory, limited capacity for information processing. So it's important to know what to recall and what to let go. So that's an important piece. So Pat, is there any other question?
Yeah, we have time for just one more question. And it is that corporate leaders are expected to be more outspoken on social justice issues now. How do you decide when to speak on those issues? And does it take board approval to do so?
The second part of that, no, it doesn't take board approval to do so. I would tell you that I am probably different than a lot of my counterparts in this topic. And what I tell you is that, so when do we speak out? We speak out when it's critically important to the business model of the Home Depot. That's when we speak out. I am not of the belief that CEOs should be driving social policy in America. That is the job of the American public and what they do through the polls to elect officials to be able to do that. And the reason that I believe that is, as a CEO, why do I think, just because I was fortunate enough to actually obtain the chair that I sit in, why is my voice any more important than the 500,000 associates that I work for? It's their voice that matters. They vote. The Home Depot doesn't have a vote. It's not, the Home Depot doesn't go to the poll and elect officials. It is the people that go to the polls and elect officials. So I have a very strong opinion that it is not our job to speak out on every issue that comes up. As a matter of fact, I was actually talking to a group of students about 2 years ago on this very topic. And I asked them the question, I said, put yourself in my shoes. We serve 90 million households in the United States. There's 130 million occupied households. We serve at least 90 million of them. We have 500,000 associates. So when you're serving that customer base as a retailer, your job is to serve those customers and try to provide great value. You can be rest assured at those numbers that inside and outside the company, the polarization of views on social issues represent the country's polarization that we see today. So as a public company CEO, Do I have the right to jeopardize my shareholders and the livelihood of my associates because I want to put forth my opinion? I don't think so. I don't believe that that's my right as a CEO.
Very good. That was the last question. And I just want to take 2 seconds and thank you, Craig, for spending a portion of your evening with us. Your leadership is inspiring, and we have learned much from you. You have provided many valuable insights, students, professionals, and executives who joined us tonight. And my gratitude also goes to our audience members for their time. I hope you walk away from this conversation strengthened as you seek to lead in your own spheres of influence in business and society. Craig, thank you again for your time and for the perspective you have shared.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's great seeing you again. Even though we're virtual, I really appreciate you having me tonight. Thank you.
Thank you for coming back because you have been with Scheller College and in person in the past. So thank you. This concludes our program and have a great rest of the evening.
Bye now. Thank you.